So, what exactly is the difference between commercial fiction and literary fiction, and why is that important for you as a fiction writer? Great question to ask. I don't have time to get into all the dimensions of it, but I'll do my best to answer that question in about the next 10 to 15 minutes. So, I remember being in a high school English class and learning the difference between commercial and literary fiction. I mean, I probably vaguely familiar with the concepts before, but hadn't heard the terms. So commercial fiction is pretty obvious. Fiction that's written, I mean, for commercial purposes, mean to make money, or we might say to entertain, but ultimately to make money. There's a lot of popular examples. Popular novels today. Um, I'll give you some examples in a little bit, but I read some Star Wars novels. That's where I go over my fun fiction, comic books, things like that. I don't claim they're especially highbrow. They could be well written, entertaining fiction, but they're fun. Literary fiction, it seems like it should be obvious, but it's not quite as much. I was trying to give it a definition, and I was like, well, it's literature, right? And that's a question of what makes a book literature, high classic literature as opposed to just a book. And I don't have time to deal with that question either. I also spent 7 years in college as an English major, undergrad and grad, and couldn't find a definitive answer to that question yet either. I know I'm burned out of academia a little bit, but so that question is too big for us right now. But we have this feeling that certain books are literature rather than just fun books, classics. Obviously, a lot of the ones we had to read in high school and college and such like that. I was trying to think of a contemporary example of literary fiction. And I couldn't much because I was an English major and we don't read living authors. I say that somewhat jokingly. The first one I thought of was To Kill a Mockingbird, but even that's like 60 years ago now. And I did a quick Google search before I get into that, let me say this. I did look up, an official definition for literary fiction. Just on Wikipedia, nothing fancy. And it even said like fiction that's hard to classify in other genres. We have genre fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, adventure, horror, romance, whatever you want to call it. A lot of different genres that some of us write and read. That's all called genre fiction. And at least part of the official definition for literary fiction is it doesn't fit one of those genres. It's hard to classify. I guess there's also an assumption that's character driven. I remember learning that in high school. It's not plot driven, it's character driven. It's more about the character's motives than just about the plot happening to them and things like that. So there are some key differences, but the two of the big ones are it doesn't necessarily fit, literary fiction doesn't necessarily fit one of those other genres, and two, it should be more character driven than plot driven. So I know it's hard to classify what counts as literature or not, but those are the general examples. I did a quick Google search for contemporary literary fiction just because I was curious as what would come up as some of the examples. Because again, I mean, I haven't read that much contemporary fiction, or I am reading current authors, but my fun ones like Star Wars authors and stuff. And I wasn't sure what fit in there. The Kite Runner came up, which I haven't read yet. It's on my list, but I haven't gotten there. Little Fires Everywhere. I've been hearing that name recently. I think it's relatively new. I'm not too familiar. Maybe I should read it because I've been hearing about it, but I haven't read it yet. And I even saw The Handmaid's Tale come up, which I have read. I would agree it's literary, or at least has some very heavy literary elements. But it also can fall into a genre like sci-fi or dystopia. It's definitely just dystopia. Um, so that leads me to my next point. I kind of started to wonder, what about the overlap between commercial fiction and literary fiction? Like, is every single book either one or the other, or can there be some overlap? I submit that there can. I remember even asking this question back in high school when I first read, when I first learned these definitions or learned these concepts, and I was reading a Star Wars book because again, that's what I go to for fun fiction a lot of times, even back then. Um, and I'm getting to a point about the two types of fiction, but I was reading like I think it's the Corellian trilogy by Roger McBride Allen, and I couldn't tell you which of the three books it was. I read it like 15 years ago, so it's all a unit in my mind now. But the Corellian trilogy, you can look it up if you ever want to read it. For those keeping track at home, it's not canon anymore, which means it's part of the Legends universe. Disney didn't follow this story when they bought Star Wars and made their new canon. So it's not considered canon, but it's just it's a fun story if you really love Star Wars and want to get into it. And somewhere in the Star Wars book, there was a scene of Han Solo, and one of the villains was his long lost cousin or something, named Thraken Sal Solo. And I mean, again, not canon anymore. I don't think that character exists in canon. But basically, one of Thrawn's relatives, someone in his family who sorry, I said Thrawn. I've been talking about the Thrawn books so much lately. One of Han's relatives, someone who he cares about and loves so much, is on the opposite side of him. Or I mean, I don't know if it was the dark side of the Force. I don't think it was a Force user, just like maybe aligned with the Empire or whoever the bad guys were in that one. But someone he loved was going against him, which is a hard thing. And I mean, the new movies explore that dynamic also with obviously Han's son Kylo Ren being the villain. But I remember a scene where Han went to confront his brother or his cousin, whoever it was, in prison. And I don't remember the specific dialogue or anything, but I just remember it dealing with the internal conflict and emotions that you feel torn. Something like that happens. Like you feel like you want to stick up for what you believe is right, but you also want to love your family member or whatever. I mean, many of us have had situations where someone we love or care about is going down a path we can't agree with. I have too. Many of you have too. So we can resonate with that on a human level. And I just that scene, for whatever reason, struck me 15 years ago, and I remember asking myself, can something be like halfway between commercial fiction and literary? I mean, this is a Star Wars book. I'm not, even I won't claim it's high literature. Obviously it was written for entertainment, for commercial purposes, and I'm like, at the same time, that doesn't mean it's shallow or surface level necessarily or anything. I mean, it doesn't mean it's the highest literature you'll ever read, but I'm like, there is character development, there is realistic human themes, realistic struggles between not just robots and spaceships, but between humans and their conflict with each other, within themselves. There are deep emotions here. I'm like, these are at least some elements of literary fiction. I mean, again, I'm not claiming it's the entire book is literary, but or that every Star Wars book is literary, but I'm like, there's some elements here that belong in literary fiction. So I started wondering, can a commercial book have elements of literary fiction, at least some elements, or can it be like halfway between commercial and literary? I don't know what you call that. I don't know how to classify that. But I submit basically that not each book, not each story is completely in one camp or completely in the other. Even commercial fiction can be really well done commercial fiction that has some things like character development and themes and just compelling plots and things like that. Other popular examples, I mean, there's lots of them, but my wife and I were talking about it a couple weeks ago. We were watching one of the James Bond movies, Skyfall, not the new one. We're rewatching them, and the Daniel Craig ones in preparation for the new one, which I haven't seen yet, so no spoilers. But we were watching Skyfall a couple weeks ago, and we started talking about, sometime I got on this too. I mean, the James Bond movies, which are obviously based on novels, the spy genre, most people I don't think would claim that's high literature. I mean, I feel like the movies and probably the books are pretty episodic and just each one's kind of a self-contained adventure. I mean, they continue somewhat, but they're for entertainment. They're for commercial purposes, and yet at the same time, Skyfall had James Bond confronting his past. He went to his childhood home and had to deal with those emotions. I mean, you see this guy who's usually a tough action hero starting to be becoming a little bit more vulnerable. I mean, he didn't show that outwardly entirely, but having to confront some of his vulnerabilities and some of his scars from the past and things like that. And I'm like, there are literary elements here. I won't say that the entire thing is deep, high literature or whatever you want to call it, but I mean, again, there's character development, there's human emotion, there's just themes and ideas and feelings that we can resonate with as the reader, as the viewer. And I'm like, yeah, that happens a lot. I mean, again, I'm a big Marvel fan too, obviously, comics and movies. And I won't claim that the MCU movies are are high art or whatever that means, but again, they have character development, they have some compelling plots, they have themes of right and wrong and things like that. I would argue there are some literary elements among what is otherwise a commercial franchise. So anyway, I'm sure you can think of lots and lots of examples too of stories you like that probably are written for commercial purposes, and yet they're not just surface level, shallow, whatever people think of when we think of lowbrow commercial fiction. They have at least some literary elements because there's rich character development, deep themes, compelling stories, things like that. So I'm not really here today to solve the debate, like the debate between what is literature or what defines literary fiction or any of that. If I was still in academia, maybe I'd write a thesis on it or something, but I am not going back there anytime soon. Maybe in 20 years, I have no idea. What I am here today to do is to encourage genre writers like myself. I'm writing a superhero story, so I say it's action drama. I mean, it's superheroes, but I try to make it character based too. So I'm definitely trying to apply this to my own writing, which I believe is commercial, but hopefully with some literary elements, hopefully with some strong literary elements. I am here to encourage genre writers to use literary elements in your story too, by which I mean character development, thematic depth, human emotion, whatever it is that makes literature, which again is hard to quantify, hard to define. But just those characteristics of the classics, of the books that we as a race or as a culture really revere. I guess what I'm saying is they don't have to be reserved for just the classics. You can emulate that too in your writing, and you should. You should write deep, complex characters who have realistic desires and motives and such, and realistic problems in some ways. There's things like fighting a supervillain not realistic, but there's things like fighting your self-doubt that is realistic. You guys know what I mean. You've read enough books and watched enough movies to understand the difference here. What I'm saying is, genre writers, write your stories with at least some literary elements so that they're, one, believable, two, they'll resonate with the reader, and maybe in 200 years or something, some of these things that we now think are popular are just popular commercial fiction. Maybe a future generation will consider them high literature too. I don't know, but that's my encouragement to you today. Excuse me. Hope it helps. Hope you're keeping up with your writing goals and just able to write the story you want to tell from your heart with all that human depth that you bring into it as well. That's all for now. Happy reading and writing. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time. Bye.